Hello, good morning. Welcome to today's webinar. And I'm pretty excited to be here because this is the launch of one of 12 free webinars that the Food Safety Girl myself has decided to host to promote food safety and food safety compliance in the food safety industry in particular amongst small businesses and consumers. So again, thank you for joining and making time out of your day, and I hope this session will be value added and that, of course, you will return for next month. So the idea is that every month in the second Thursday of the month, the sessions will be focused on different areas of food safety. And of course, as I said before, the target audience is for anybody who consumes food. So once you're a consumer, a session of this nature is for you. So whether we're working as a manufacturer, you're working in a food establishment, at the end of the day, we're all consumers. So I'm going to be sharing my screen, and I'd love for someone to confirm that they are actually seeing what's on screen. Now, the title of today's session is Food Safety Basics for Cottage Businesses. And in the industry, rather, we refer to cottage businesses as businesses or food operations that are based at home. So they're not in your usual manufacturing capacities. When you think of manufacturing, you think of a huge building with different, large equipment. You have staff complement of over 1,500. However, for cottage-based businesses, it's a much smaller scale operation. And of course, that does not exempt cottage businesses from being regulated by food safety agencies. Now, the purpose of today's webinar is, as I mentioned before, food safety is not just for factories or big companies. It's for small home-based food businesses facing real risks from consumers and, of course, in protecting their brand. Now, this session is about awareness, prevention, and confidence. It is supposed to be educational, practical, and interactive. It is not legal advice, but it is grounded in food safety principles used by inspectors and food safety agencies that are governed by regulations. Of course, there will be a question and answer session at the end, so you may feel free to jot those questions down, so at the end we can have discussions surrounding that. Now, just a quick introduction for those who don't know who I am. My name is Alison Richards, also known as the Food Safety Girl. I am an experienced food safety professional with over 14 years in food safety regulation, policy, and standard development. So for the last 14 years of my career, I've spent them doing inspections, being a part of standard and policy development as it relates to Jamaica, having represented Jamaica at multiple international sessions, and of course, that is with the intention of strengthening food safety policy in Jamaica, and of course, ensuring that consumers get safe food. I'm also a certified trainer. I am a columnist for the Jamaica Observer, where every Thursday, including today, I have a food safety column in the paper. And I'm also the founder of the Food Safety Girl platform. Now, before we get into our session, there is a poll I would like to share with you. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm just going to ask you to participate in the poll that I have launched just now. There are just two questions, and I'm just going to ask you to take a second to answer them. Our first question is, what best describes your food business right now? And their options are home-based, planning to start, established, growing, or you're just curious. And second, which of these have you done at least once? Let food cool on the counter just for a bit, checked food by smell instead of date, forgot to label leftovers, used the same spoon twice while cooking, or all of the above. I'm seeing someone has already selected all of the above. So we're just going to allow you 1 minute more to participate in the poll, and then we'll move right into today's activities. As I just want to keep it for an hour, we don't want you to get too bored, and we have a lot of information to share. Or I see a few persons planning to start. I'm excited for you. We have one home-based person, someone who's growing. That's always a plus. And we have a few persons who are just curious, and nothing is wrong with that. The idea is to satisfy whatever curiosity you may have. And of course, I'm hoping that by the end of today's session that you will, walk away feeling empowered to possibly start your own cottage food business. All right. So we're gonna end the poll right now, just so we can get ahead into today's proceedings. And I'm also sharing the results with you. All right, good. So in terms of food safety, the difference between a cottage versus a large manufacturer, which I would have touched on earlier, is the scale. It's just the size of the business that you have going. And it does not take away from the responsibility that you have as it relates to food safety. And of course, that is keeping the end user safe, which is your customer. Now, let's look at some of the key differences. Some of the key differences include the volume of the food that you produce. So, are we talking about 20 cupcakes that you're single packaging individually, or are you talking about hundreds? Are we talking about 10 bottles of watermelon juice versus a larger manufacturer who is doing, pasteurization and doing, bulk manufacturing of juice? So those are some things that are one of the key differences rather between a cottage and a large manufacturer. Another difference is the complexity of the operations. Are we talking about having different lines? Are we having a receival warehouse separately from the building that you're doing production in? So the complexity of the operations will vary between a cottage-based and a large manufacturer. We're also looking at the number of people involved. Is it just two workers? Is it just you alone, operating from your kitchen versus a larger manufacturing company with, hundreds of persons? And of course, another key difference is the level of documentation and formality. Now, I wanted to add before moving forward is that my experience as a food safety regulator doing inspections would have, and that's one of the key reasons why I decided to have this webinar as the first one, is because there is such a difficulty that I have, witnessed our cottage-based industry operators undergoing in terms of understanding how they can apply these food safety regulations to their operations. So I'm hoping that, I'll be able to adequately explain these before going forward. Now, what are some of the similarities? Once you're making food, there is the risk of making someone sick. There's also the similarity of the legal and moral responsibility to sell safe food. So whether it's a small man, the person's on the roadside that do their traditional pastries or pink on top, your peanut cake, there is that responsibility and that requirement to ensure that whatever you're producing will make your consumers safe, they won't suffer from a bout of foodborne illnesses. Another similarity is the need to control contamination. Once you're preparing food, just as how you would for your family members, there is a need to ensure that nobody gets sick from eating the food that you're preparing. And a final similarity I will touch on is the expectation to follow food safety principles. So you are required to follow the regulations and the laws of the country. I don't have enough fingers to count how many times persons will be like, oh, just a little small man, oh yeah, how you go on. So, it's not that much of a big deal. I'm just a small man trying to try to survive and to make some food. But at the end of the day, you must ensure that food safety is a priority. And that, of course, once your food is safe, people eat your food, they don't have any other issues, then of course they will come back. That's kind of how you build your clientele, build trust in your consumers to ensure once they have a good experience, then of course the likelihood of them returning will increase as well. And of course, they will tell others about it. Now, in a cottage business, persons may use their home kitchen. They're producing in smaller batches, and of course, inadvertently, they would have fewer records. In a large manufacturer, we have our industrial equipment. Production is at high volumes, and of course, they would have some written systems and teams that are in charge of different things. So, in a large manufacturer, you may have a sanitation team, you have a quality control team, where you have a manager, you have a QC officer, you have an administrative assistant. So you're seeing where, because of the high volume or the increased numbers of staff, you build them out into teams, and one team is in charge of a particular aspect of the food safety system that you have in place. Despite these differences, both must manage hygiene. If it's a temperature-dependent process, they must be able to control temperature, and they must prevent contamination. Another important element is handling allergens correctly. Allergens are often overlooked culturally, in my opinion. Persons don't think about something as simple as eating peanuts in a non-allergenic space where the dust could possibly, cause an allergic reaction. So the handling of allergens must be documented, must be regulated, must be managed. And of course, that will in turn protect your consumer. And of course, they must comply with food safety requirements. Now, food safety in a cottage setting, what does that look like? I'll reiterate that food safety is about preventing harm. It's not about achieving perfection. I can recall numerous times, I remember being in charge of a social media surveillance program at my previous occupation, where we basically just reached out to persons who, those food stores that you'd say advertising their food products online. And I remember every time I got somebody to register for becoming registered, it was always, they were so nervous. You go to the inspection there, then the only thing left for them to do is pass out. And I always used to be like, it's just an inspection. There's nothing to worry about. You're given the opportunity to correct anything if anything is wrong. So it's not about achieving perfection. It's about the intention to prevent harm. And we're looking at, is your food safe, or does it look clean? Because we have a lot of that in the advent of social media. We have a lot of food looking clean, but is it necessarily safe? Now, home kitchens are higher risk environments primarily because they're shared spaces. So you're sharing your space with the different members of your family members. You might not be the only person at home that cooks. So when you cook and you clean up and you leave your space, there's somebody going to come in, either the husband, the child going to come in. Somebody's going to come in after you. And of course, that increases the risk, right? The other risk is that you may have pets, animals, which are a no-no when it comes down to food processing. So you can't have, and I'm sure we all have seen on social media where people preparing food and you see their cat in the kitchen or on the counter. And to you, it's like a ick. But a question to ask is that, your food that will you eat from cottage-based industries, do these people have pets? How are they constraining them and keeping them away from these environments that they're preparing food in? You may have visitors, in your kitchen, stuff like that. Another risk is mixing your personal and business use. So, you tend to have, if you're operating from your kitchen, your everyday things that you use in your kitchen are usually used. How is it that you separate that when you're ready to bake your batch of banana bread? So those are things to consider, right? Now, I just shared a few practical scenarios. Some more of them is that you're baking at night after your family meals. So after you finish dinner, how is it that you are cleaning up to ensure that when you start baking, if you probably cooked shrimp for dinner and you're about to bake just regular cake, and you know that shrimp is an allergen, sorry. And how is it that you're cleaning up after if you're going to be using that space to ensure that you don't put your products at risk? And remember that allergens are heat stable, so you can't cook away an allergen. So those are things that you have to think about. Another example is using the same fridge for your business and household food. I've been on inspections where I see persons have a separate fridge, they have a separate cupboard of different storage area where they might store their business stuff from their personal stuff. And that is what we encourage. I mean, everybody might not be able to afford a new refrigerator, but we have the idea is that you want to see some signs of separation of the business. And also, as I mentioned before, mixing your personal and business resources in the same space. Now let's look at some contamination risks. We have three types. We have our biological, our chemical, and physical. Our biological risks look like bacteria, virus, molds, and some examples of that is raw eggs, your dairy, your milk, cooked foods left out too long. So that is a whole other thing, your leftovers. How is it you have leftovers in your refrigerator? They're growing mold. How can they jeopardize the quality of what you have going on as it relates to your business? Second type is chemical, your cleaning agents. You're at home, you're using bleach in the kitchen. Are you making sure that the concentration or the residual chlorine that is remaining on your countertops after you've done wiping off, is that at a safe limit? Because the last thing you want to do is for somebody to want to buy a product and it smell like bleach, especially for persons who are doing juices. People using bleach to wash their fruits and vegetables, which is not recommended. At that particular, you have to be very careful with your concentration. The last thing you want to do is somebody to open your juice and it smell or taste like bleach, right? You also the risk of pesticides. I spray a little big on last time because I saw some ants or cockroach. Are you wiping down after? And of course, improper storage. Some examples of this is storing your sanitizer near your ingredients. Your bleach bottle is not properly labeled, so you might think it look like vinegar. So those are some things that you want to consider. And thirdly, your physical. Here, jewelry, packaging pieces, those can be present in your food products, like broken gloves, loose nails, your earring that you're wearing, anything that is not supposed to be in your food could become an issue. Some common food safety mistakes. No clear separation of personal versus business or equipment, or business equipment and utensils. As I mentioned before, the same bowl that you use to make your fried dumplings is the same bowl that you use to wash your rice, is the same bowl you use to come and make your baked products before going out. We want to try and separate those things, right? Improper cooling and storage, that tends to be an issue, especially if you don't have a space. You're baking, you need that downtime for your products to cool before packaging, because that is really an important risk that you want to avoid. Condensation in your packaging, which can lead to mold growth. So if you realize you baked something just a day ago and usually it lasts till 5 days and you see mold start growing on it, chances are you're having some issues because of condensation from the packaging, right? Another common mistake is using damaged or unsuitable containers, inconsistent hand washing. So you're probably using a recipe, you have your phone, you're in between your phone, but this is the same phone that you take to the restroom, right? So you have to ensure that you have a hand washing everything, at every chance. Once you move away from your preparation space, you're washing your hands. There's also the mistake of poor separation of raw and ready to eat food. You can't have your egg being stored right next to your products that you just bake, you're resting them on top of your egg because they're light enough to withstand it. Overcrowded refrigerators is also an issue. When they're overcrowded, there is little to no circulation of air, and of course, that can prevent improper cooling. And lastly, no written cleaning routine or other documentation. The inspectors need to see something written. Right, and we talk about written, we're not talking about anything that have to be fancily typed up and in a big whole manual. It can be something as simple as a dedicated journal or a book that you write out. And these routine or documentation is basically a recipe. So for a sanitation record, it's basically a recipe for cleaning. And even though me and you clean and we know how to clean, we still have to have it documented, right? Now let's look at personal hygiene. In particular, we're going to be looking at when to wash our hands, not just how, illness and food protection, and hair restraints, clothing, and jewelry. Now, you're washing your hands before you start food preparation, between handling raw and ready-to-eat foods, after using the restroom, after touching phones, money, trash, pets, or your face, after breaks, eating or smoking, after cleaning activities, right? You do not prepare food when experiencing vomit or diarrhea. So if you're sick and you get this big order and you know say it can't help you to pay the bills them this month, that is something you have to consider. Consider getting somebody on board to do the production for you. But we don't recommend that, especially when we have foodborne illnesses such as hepatitis A out there, where these are long incubation periods and you have the incidence of shedding in stool. So all of these things can be introduced to the food, and of course you pass it on to your consumer. You want to avoid food handling with fever, sore throat, or infected wounds. I mean, that goes without saying. If you have the last thing you want is bodily fluids in your food product, right? Now, covering your cuts with waterproof bandages and gloves is recommended. You don't want to have a cut and you have your band-aid just over there because your band-aid can fall into the food. And the last thing I want is when I'm biting into a piece of cake is a piece of band-aid. And I've seen videos on social media where this is happening, right? You must report your illness. If you're at home, as I say, if you have a supplier who is relying on you, tell them, you're sick, you can wait a couple days for the order. And of course, you have to be able to step away from preparing food. Now, your PPEs, your hair restraints, your hair must be covered. And when I say hair, that includes your facial hair as well. Our local standards have not been updated to include beard net, and that is always a thing that we used to get pushback from our clients or some clients, but it also speaks, or regulation also speaks to having nothing to compromise the integrity of your food, and that can be hair. So, we usually rally on that clause to be like, you need to have your hair restrained, either by wearing a cap, a hairnet, or a tied back hair. You also want to make sure that you're wearing clean clothing because, of course, that defeats the purpose of trying to be clean with your hands and your food preparation area, but your clothing is unclean. And also using dedicated food prep aprons is recommended. No rings, no bracelets, watches, or artificial nails. No nail polish, because your nail polish can chip into your food. And of course, you want to keep your nails short and clean. Let's look at temperature control, in particular hot food versus cold food, the danger zone, and why room temperature cooling is risky. Now, hot foods must be kept hot until served. Cold foods must be kept cold until used. Do not leave food out for just a while, and time and temperature abuse increases risk. And in particular, now it's January, a lot of people are doing the meal prep thing and everybody's back in the gym. I see quite a few companies, home-based companies, advertising meal plans. These are things for you to consider if you're considering going into that business. How are you keeping your foods hot? How are you keeping cold foods cold? How are you monitoring this temperature while you're doing your deliveries? And of course, you have to keep tabs on that. The danger zone, that is a common term or reference that we use in food safety, and that is where bacteria grows the fastest when food is not hot or cold. The longer the food stays in this range is the higher the risk, and the danger zone is typically between 4 degrees Celsius and 60 degrees Celsius. So you want to keep your foods above 60 degrees and you want to keep it below 4 degrees, right? And that's between 40 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Food should move through the danger zone as quickly as possible. Now, room temperature cooling. Food cools too slowly on the counter. Bacteria multiply before the food becomes cold. And of course, large or deep containers trap heat. So, especially the Christmas just gone, you put the big pot of rice. The recommendation is that you separate them into smaller batches before putting them into the refrigerator. And that just aids with cooling it quicker and, of course, keeping it longer. You always want to cool your food quickly using safe methods as well. Into storage and organization, we'll look at proper fridge and freezer organization, labeling and dating foods, storage of ingredients versus finished products. Now, for cold storage, you do not want to overload your shelves. You want to allow air to circulate for even cooling. You also want to make sure that you store your raw foods below ready-to-eat foods. The last thing you want to do is to have your raw meat juices spilling over onto something that is already cooked or ready to eat in your refrigerator. So you put your raw foods below and your foods that are ready to eat or your fresh produce above. You want to keep your foods covered and protected to prevent any freezer burn, prevent the entry of any spores that may be laying around, because of course that's how food spoilage happens quicker. And also to maintain clean and organized shelves. When you're labeling foods, you want to make sure that you label them clearly, include the name of the product and the date prepared, use your oldest food first, practicing FIFO first in, first out, and to remove foods past safe use or quality dates. You want to make sure that you're storing your ingredients separately from the finished foods, keeping finished products fully covered, avoid cross-contamination during storage, and using dedicated containers where possible. Let's move on to cleaning and sanitation. So what is cleaning versus what is sanitizing is what we'll look at. The frequency matters more than more product or more than products and simple cleaning schedules. Now, cleaning removes dirt, grease, and food residue. However, sanitizing reduces germs to safe levels. So cleaning is removing. So when you look at something and it look dirty to your eye, something dark, you see the soil, that is what cleaning does. So if you have a countertop and you just finished baking, you know you have cake crumbs, cleaning is removing all of those cake. All the things that you cannot see is what you do when you clean. And sanitizing is to ensure that there's no germs remaining on that surface. You always clean before you sanitize. And I mean, that goes without saying. You can't sanitize before you clean. And both steps are required for food safety. The frequency. Regular cleaning prevents buildup and contamination. And you must use simple approved cleaning chemicals. And of course, you want to ensure that you're using them in the way that they are recommended. Usually, that information is outlined on the label as to what concentration you're using. Infrequent deep cleaning increases the risk because if you don't clean properly, there's a buildup of whatever food or dirt is there. And of course, that increases the risk of pest infestation and the growth of microorganisms. You want to focus on consistency, not brand names, right? So how often is it that you, or how effective are you seeing your cleaning chemicals working? Those are the things you want to pay attention versus, you're saying that you've always been using this and this, this expensive, so it must be good. You want to make sure that you're using food safe chemicals in cleaning. Now, in terms of cleaning, how often should you be cleaning? You have to clean your food contact surfaces daily, at least. Cleaning your equipment after each use. You want to sanitize high-touch areas regularly and increase cleaning after spills or contamination. Now let's look at some food safety regulation. I've spoken about all of these things. Who is telling me to say all of these things? Am I making it up? No, I'm not. These are accounted for in our food safety regulation. And just sharing with you a few food safety agencies or agencies with responsibility for food safety. And primarily I've shared three here, which is the NCRA, the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority, which is the former regulatory division of the Bureau of Standards. We have the Public Health Department, the Environmental Unit. These are the inspectors that go to our food establishments to do inspections. And we also have the Food Storage and Prevention of Infestation Division, which is a division out of the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. Now, some of the regulations that these agencies are governed by are used in carrying out their inspections. One is the JS36, which is the Jamaican Standard Specification for Processed Food. And all of these standards that I'm mentioning are available for purchase at the Bureau of Standards, which is the Standards Development Authority or agency in Jamaica. We also have our JSCRS 5, which is the labeling standard. So once you're doing any form of pre-packaging and you're labeling your food, this is a standard you want to be aware of what's happening inside of it. And we have other product-specific standards, such as your breads, your jerk seasoning, your sauces, spice and sauces, your jams, jellies, and marmalades are all standards that are available at the Bureau of Standards. And some of these topics I will be touching on throughout one or two of my other webinars throughout the year. So you can keep a lookout on those. In addition, we also have a code of practice, not a mandatory standard, but it does help as it relates to the ready-to-eat food. So this is called the JCP4 Part 1, which is the Jamaican Standard Code of Practice for the Hygienic Preparation and Sale of Ready-to-Eat Food. Part 1, Food Prepared in Establishments. We also have the Public Health Regulations of 1998 and the Food Storage and Prevention of Infestation Division Regulations from 1973. Now, what do inspectors look for? They're using these regulations. What is it that they prioritize when they come into your food-based establishment? And I know it might feel cute, that these strangers are coming into your space, but that is really the only way persons or the agencies can guarantee that the food that you're processing is safe for consumers. And of course, your inspectors will be taking samples, so don't think, and I can only speak because I used to be an inspector. We don't want the products to go home and eat and to share with our family. It's really just to submit to our labs to ensure that they're safe, right? So they're looking for cleanliness and organization. You can't be preparing food and when you go in the kitchen full of the sink full of food and the floor full of food, so you want to make sure that there's some ounce of cleanliness and organization. You're able to demonstrate that. You must have evidence of control, not perfection, but control. Temperature awareness. If you're baking, are you keeping track of the temperature? If you're doing your juices, how soon you put them into the freezer for them to cool. Those are things that they're going to be paying attention to. Personal hygiene practices. You have in your nose ring, you have on some long nails, you put it on your hair net. You have on your wedding band, stuff like that you want to make sure that you're paying attention to. That just think about it. If you're preparing food, ask yourself if somebody saw me or if I saw somebody preparing food and they look like how I look or they're doing the things I do, would I want to eat that food? That's what I want for persons to, that's what I always try kind of drill into the head of persons. And it's kind of like do unto others as you have them do unto you, that principle. You must demonstrate that you're knowledgeable. Do you understand the risks that are associated with your food product? A baked product is not going to have the exact same risks as a juice, right? A cold product. So those are some things that you have to be able to demonstrate that you understand the risks that are associated with your operation and that you have implemented strategies and measures to prevent, right? They're also paying attention to safe storage and separation. And of course, we mentioned earlier, you must have proof, documentation that you have done this. If it no write down, it means that it never happened. And I always try to tell my clients, if somebody come and say your food, them eat something and them get sick and it's bacon poison them, but you don't use bacon at home, how are you going to prove this? You can't go to the court with hearsay. You have to have some proof of documentation. right? So those are just quick points that the inspectors will look out for when they are operating. And we're at the end of my presentation for today. And now it's the time for you to ask me any questions that you may have. I hope I didn't bore. I'm not hearing anybody. I hope I didn't bore you. Any questions? Thanks, sorry, I didn't just I didn't bore her. Any questions from anyone? I also do have a checklist to share with you. It's kind of like a get ready checklist that you can use to prepare yourself for an inspection by an inspector. For persons who registered, I will have had your email addresses, so I will send that to your email shortly after today's webinar has concluded. So you can expect that in your emails. We have a question here that is asking, just a sec. What are some of the safe methods of cooling? Right. So for cooling, the principle is that the quicker the food cools is the better it is. Are you, Danny, can you confirm if you're referring to baking? Okay, great. So she's referring to baking. What are some safe methods? So you can use a fan. However, your fan has to undergo the same sanitation practices that all the other equipments are going under. So you can't, the fan tends to accumulate dust. You really cannot have a dirty fan cooling. Because remember, when you're baking products, the kill step for all your pathogens would have been baking. So then it defeats the purpose that you kill everything in your baked products and then you come back and you dirty it up with your hand and your fan, right? So that is a method that a lot of persons who are in the baking industry use. They use fans for cooling. Also, as I mentioned before, you want to make sure you're adequately cool. So you cannot put them in the bag and say, oh, them going cool inside there. That is the worst thing you could do because that lowers the shelf life of your product. You mentioned for cooked meals as well. The idea is to make sure you refrigerate within 2 hours of cooking and cool in smaller batches. The larger the batches, it means that is the longer the cool air going to get to take to get to the center or whatever you're storing. And of course, it going to create that danger zone that we spoke about earlier. So the safest way to cool your cooked meals is within 2 hours and of course batch it. So you want to put, and I know persons tend to want to, when they're doing meal preps, they tend to pre-package the meals already. A recommendation and something that I realize works better is that I separate them. So if I'm cooking chicken and rice and vegetables, I cook my chicken, store it in one container by itself, and then on the morning off, I assemble the meal, so to speak. So that kind of allows, because what happens is that different foods have different properties. So the likelihood of it going spoiler or spoiling is higher when you mix them together to store them versus when you store them separately. I hope that's helpful.
I
Any
have a
other?
question.
Um,
Oh, I'm Ricardo. So it's asking
yeah, Ricardo.
like what's a good sanitation checklist or what a sanitation checklist should entails. And
All right.
also the if so using dishwashing liquid versus using like Fab soap or another cleaning agents, what is the right one to use?
All right, those are very good questions. Thank you, Ricardo. So one sanitation checklist, some things you want to make sure that you are paying attention to as it relates to sanitation is when. So when are we sanitizing? Is it before or after? Two, the type of cleaning chemical that you're using. You want to make sure that it's something that is food grade. In terms of another thing for a checklist is all your equipment. So down to your spoon, your bowl, everything must be accounted for on your sanitation. So a good way to do it, because in addition to a checklist, you kind of need to have a SOP, which is a standard operating procedure, the recipe for how you're going to clean. So it can be a general thing where you say, for all utensils, I'm going to be using um 1 cup or 1 spoon of detergent or whatever. So you have to have a general procedure and then you do detail how you would clean it. And of course, in terms of a checklist, you want to ensure that there's a schedule. If it's something high volume, so so if probably you get a big order, the whole day you're going to be baking, you definitely cannot be doing sanitation just twice before and after. You have to have some break in between where you clear up and make sure that you're cleaning. Another aspect of sanitation that you have to consider too is your allergen. So if you're doing, so for example, banana bread, eggless, you're doing eggless baked products. So you're doing a banana bread first and then you're doing a banana nut.
Oh,
Of
Christian,
course,
sorry to pause. I do meats, so I do pork and
or you do
chicken.
meat. Okay, so for sanitation, you want to make sure that for meat, you definitely have hot water. That is a non-negotiable. Or a regulation actually requires that every food processing establishment must have a supply of hot and cold water. However, as an inspector, having that experience, it is totally enforced for meat, cold products. You definitely need some hot water to break up all of what's happening. So in your case, you want to make sure, so I mean, it's a small scale, boil some water in your kettle. When you finish close down for the day or in between, you use it to clean up, especially for your floors, because meat can drip. For your sanitation, it's the same principle for room temperature versus cold products. You just want to ensure that if you're probably pounding out for the day, you're doing meats, washing your scales, that has to be a part of your sanitation, your scales, right? You're wearing your apron, how often you're washing your apron? Your aprons must be changed daily, right?
I use a disposable apron, and I didn't know that about the hot water, so that's something I'll learn.
Yeah, man, you want to use hot water because what hot water does is cut the fat and all those things that the meat would come from the meat, and of course, bacteria love fat. So once you get rid of that fat, then it prevents the buildup of bacteria. And your second question, powdered soap is not food grade. Just to put that out there, unless you're ordering from a food chemical manufacturing company that offers pellets. But dishwashing liquid is just that. It's food grade, and that's why it's advertised as dishwashing liquid. But powdered soap is not food grade soap. All right, we have 5 minutes to go. Any more questions? And I should have asked Ricardo, am I clear on the advice I provided?
Yes, you are. It's just a little bit fast. I just jot them down and then it'll go back over.
All right, no problem. All right, so in the interim, I'd just like to share with you today's next webinar is scheduled for February 5, and it will be on safe street food. So we're going to be focusing on street food. So all your jerk vendors, all those people that sell food from the street, or fruit vendors, person selling, their coffee, having a coffee stand. That is something that I want you guys to share it. Come on if you're just curious. That is what we're going to be covering. We're going to be covering, of course, the regulatory aspect of it, even though we don't have, a strong regulatory oversight of street food. It is something that we all as consumers suffer from time to time. I've had street food and I've gotten foodborne illness from it. So I think it's a pretty important topic for us to circumvent and to discuss. And also, I'd like to share with you my article in today's Jamaica Observer is focused on safe detoxing, juicing, and meal prepping. That is something that we're all doing at the beginning of the year. And I just shared in my article ways in which you can do so safely. So if you have access to Jamaican Observer, it is also available online. I can share the link in the chat and that you guys can have access to it. There is one question in the chat. Sardia says she does punch and I store them as soon as I finish labeling. Is that okay? It is hard for me to tell, seeing that I'm not observing, but a quick tip is that you can consider labeling your bottles before filling them. So as soon as you fill them, seal them, put them in your refrigerator. So that's the only tip I can give you, not, knowing the intimacy of your operation, the least amount you can do between filling and refrigeration is best, right? Does that help, Sardia? Awesome. Now, if you are not already following me on social media, I'm not sure how you learned of this webinar. Feel free to do so. I'm on WhatsApp at 876-802-5114. Can always message me with any questions that you have. Can reach me by email at thefoodSafetyGirlJA@gmail.com. And you can also follow me across social media networks on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and you will find me there. Any other
I
questions
have
before we start?
I have
Sure, go
one more question.
ahead.
All right, so the freezer. So I'm thinking you want to clean the freezer, you have to defrost. If you have,
Mm-hmm.
say you still have products, what's the best way to clean and defrost the fridge without like cross-contaminating or making something happen to the products that you took out of the fridge?
You could use a cooler. So if you have a big glue, it's time sensitive at this point, right? So you're going get a little some ice, put them in a cooler, and you get to work on your refrigerator or your freezer from there. And you may want to also schedule. So if you have a deep freeze is not something somebody going to clean every week. So you can put it on a schedule, like probably it's every month. So you can, based on your business and the influx of your orders and how quick your products go, you can do a bit of an analysis and a risk analysis to say, at this time of the month is when I really have the least amount of products. Because the least amount of products is the least risk that you have, right? So that is something that you can consider.
So then would I do it on based on having when I have the least amount of product, I schedule cleaning compared to not just when the fridge look like you want to clean it
No,
then.
no. You're going to consider that. However, you remember when you're doing anything, you have to do an assessment. You have to kind of look at it and say, what are the things that could go wrong? How can I reduce what can go wrong? So yes, the fridge want to clean, but of course, if you know it want to clean, but so next week is when you expect that client that going come and order a whole heap of meat, then you say, okay, next week we can do it. Or you call up the client, hey, you want to meet them, whatever. So you have to be able to make that assessment on your own. And as if I'm here in a consultative role today or a trainer, that is not something I can readily tell you because, and remember, this is not legal advice. So you don't want it to be that, oh, but the fridge dirty, but I have too much products to clean it. That shouldn't be an excuse. So as I said before, use the coolers and stuff like that.
All right, we'll do. Or
Yeah.
I could do it in the night when it's much cooler.
That is an option that you could consider. All right. All right, so thank you for joining me this morning. I think it was a pretty informative session. Well, I might be a bit biased, but thank you very much. I will also reach out to you to just do a quick survey on how you found today's session, and I will also send a checklist for your inspection readiness form. All right, so thank you and enjoy the rest of your Thursday.